Theresa May's problem, I'm afraid, was that she was the prisoner of her own party. By comparison with her corrupt successor and her incompetent successor but one, Liz Truss, she now gets a relatively good press. But what people shouldn't forget is that she became Prime Minister in order to deliver Brexit, and she failed 3 times to do so. So I think the reason why she's now thrashing around 4 years later, she never said a word to me at the time of this complaint, is that she wants to find someone to blame other than herself for her own palpable failure.
And this weekend, Sunday Times, Theresa May accused the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, of abusing his power to stop Brexit.
The former Prime Minister believes the impasse over Northern Ireland could have been solved had he allowed a vote on her deal to leave the EU. Theresa May said,
"We got to a point where the DUP were being positive. Mr Bercow wouldn't let us put the motion down. So that meant we couldn't have the debate, we couldn't have the vote. And by the time we did, the DUP had changed their mind."
She went on,
"Until John Bercow took office, I had never seen someone so blatantly abuse the power they held as Speaker to promote a particular view." Well, let's get a response to that from John Bercow, of course, former Speaker of the House of Commons. Good morning to you.
Asma, good morning to you.
When did you first realise that Theresa May held these particular views about a particular thing that happened at a certain time?
Yesterday afternoon is the answer to your question. Her thesis carries no weight or credibility whatsoever. It represents, I'm afraid, a sad and absurd attempt to shift blame for her own abject failure. 3 times, Asma, she lost. 3 times she blamed Parliament for her loss. 3 times she failed to take responsibility for her own mistakes. The reason why she didn't get her deal through is that she crafted a deal that was wholly unacceptable to her own party, and she couldn't expect any other party to push it through for her. That is the long and the short of the matter.
Okay. Let's just, because she's quite specific about this. She says, we got to a point where the DUP were being positive. We were actually at the point of them being willing to say they'd support the deal. The normal processes went on in terms of going to the Speaker, that's you obviously, to talk about the motion, and he wouldn't let us put the motion down. That meant we couldn't have the debate, we couldn't have the vote, and by the time we did, the DUP changed their mind. And so there was a point we could have had a vote to do Brexit on the basis of the deal. He took a decision that meant that didn't go ahead. This is very specific. Yes, go on.
Oh, my response is extremely specific, Asma. First, there's not a scrap of evidence whatsoever from any public statement of any kind at any time that the Democratic Unionists were suddenly going to vote for her deal. 3 times they voted against it, to a man and a woman. There's no evidence of any change of mind at any stage on their part. That's the first point. Okay. The second point is, when she says the usual processes were followed and we went to the Speaker about the terms of the motion, sorry, there was no usual process in that sense at all. Speaking on the basis of 10 years experience in the chair, I can tell you it's not the norm for government to approach the Speaker for a meeting about a motion. Governments table motions every day of the week. So the idea that they approached me and sought permission to table a motion and I declined is not the case. I can tell you exactly, and your listeners, what happened. On the 18th of March 2019, it was a Monday, I made a statement to the House in which I said that the prohibition on putting the same question twice in the same parliamentary session applied to the government as well as to backbenchers.
Right.
The government couldn't simply put the same proposition again and again and again in the hope of changing the House's mind. And I explained to the House, and therefore also to the government, what it needed to do if it wanted to abide by parliamentary protocol. Then what happened, I don't know whether she's even aware of this, is that 2 members of her government, David Lidington and Geoffrey Cox, came to see me to seek more specific and detailed advice. I told them they had 2 options whereby they could safely and procedurally properly proceed, and they took one of those options and tabled the motion. The government lost that vote by 58.
Yes.
votes. That is the reality. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with me stopping her getting her deal. She delayed for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks with considerable discourtesy to the House of Commons before the House had a chance to vote on her deal. Her deal was rejected by the largest majority in parliamentary history in January, and then again in early March.
Okay, one other point. Yeah, John Bercow, just one other point just on this before we move on.
Sure.
Obviously, the procedure, the process is very important, and we're very grateful to you for giving us an insight into that. She makes an ideological point about you as well, though. She says, until John Bercow took office, I had never seen someone so blatantly abuse the power they held as Speaker to promote a particular view. It seemed clear to me that John Bercow was trying to thwart the delivery of Brexit. The impression was he was working with those who favoured a second referendum and against the policy of the government. How do you answer that?
Well, it's simply wrong. What's the evidence for the thesis? What is she saying? Is she claiming that I held meetings to advance the cause of a second referendum? I did nothing of the sort. What I did, Asma, consistently, if you forgive me, you asked me the question, that's kind enough to allow me to answer. What I did consistently was to operate in a way that would enable Parliament to have its say and to have its way. And when the Brexiteers were in a minority, I was the Speaker who selected an amendment by John Barron, a Conservative Brexiteer, to the government's Queen's Speech as long ago as 2013. The trouble is that the Brexiteers were very happy with my speakership when I made decisions in their favour, but they didn't like it when I made decisions that didn't suit them. Theresa May's problem, I'm afraid, was that she was the prisoner of her own party. By comparison with her corrupt successor and her incompetent successor but one, Liz Truss, she now gets a relatively good press. But what people shouldn't forget is that she became Prime Minister in order to deliver Brexit, and she failed 3 times to do so. So I think the reason why she's now thrashing around 4 years later, she never said a word to me at the time of this complaint, is that she wants to find someone to blame other than herself for her own palpable failure.
So that's interesting, and that's what I was going to ask you, actually. She didn't say anything at the time. What was your relationship with Theresa May like?
I had a perfectly good relationship with Theresa May. She kindly supported my re-election as Speaker in 2017, providing helpful text for me to use in my constituency as I sought re-election to the House, and she then supported my re-election to the chair. We didn't have a cross word. We had perfectly courteous and civil, even cordial relations. She came to see me on another occasion about a wholly unrelated matter. But the point I want to make to you and to your listeners here, Asma, is this. At no stage in 2019 did Theresa May say to me, Mr. Speaker, I think you are behaving improperly. You're stopping me getting my deal. We were feet apart, week after week after week in the House of Commons. If she thought that I had abused my power and disadvantaged her, she could have said so. She didn't. She didn't say so once, and neither did the government chief whip say so to me. She arranged for 2 of her ministers to come to see me. We had a very constructive meeting. I told them how they could properly proceed. They did proceed in that way, tabling the motion for debate on March the 29th, and they lost by 58 votes. I'm sorry, but the truth of the matter is that Theresa was not a Brexiteer. She accepted responsibility for trying to deliver Brexit. She didn't understand or have antennae for the views of her own party. And so she failed, failed, and failed again. That's not my fault.
John Bercow, thank you very much for talking to us. That is John Bercow. He's a former Speaker of the House, responding to the accusations that Theresa May made in the Sunday Times in a larger interview, saying that he effectively stood in our way and effectively scuppered Brexit.